Welcome to preparations for Lent 3. This is Luke chapter 13. I have to say it's a bit of a hodgepodge of a reading, or is that blasphemous? But fortunately you three are going to rescue me from that. Mark, just round the corner from me in Frankton, Queenstown, and as usual, as far away as she can get from me in Dunedin, and John on the other motor in Auckland. And welcome to the three of you. Welcome, John, because I think you come armed with background on this, I think,
I have.
patchy passage.
Well, this reading is only found in Luke's Gospel. Here are just some couple of notes I've come across. And it features 2 episodes of undeserved, sudden, and pretty gruesome death. In the first episode, religious, faithful Galileans are killed while sacrificing to God, possibly in the temple. And this is state-sanctioned terror. The story isn't supported by any existing historical accounts, but it probably would have been familiar to local audiences that Jesus is talking to. Pilate did have a history of brutality, and he was recalled to Rome to explain his actions after a particularly grisly event. Jesus isn't using the moment to have a go at Pilate. His focus is elsewhere, as we'll see. And the second episode is the death of 18 people killed by the collapse of the Tower of Siloam. And once again, it's a story not recorded elsewhere, but would have been locally known. And both events saw people die with little warning and for no apparent reason, and unprepared. And both kinds of events lead the rest of us to realize how precarious existence is. And Jesus says the victims did nothing wrong. They're not signs that they didn't die because God was angry with them. Neither event happened because they were notorious sinners. It was common in some parts of Judaism to believe that if something awful happened to you, it's because God is causing it as a result. That's what Job's friends told him, but Job knew differently, and so do we. And then Jesus goes on to tell the parable of a fig tree. And the purpose of that is to leave in our minds this thought that just as Pilate's and the Tower's victims didn't enjoy the luxury of choosing the time of their demise, likewise those who don't bear fruit, those who don't repent, bear fruit, will suddenly find they have delayed too long and lost themselves. That's a little quote from elsewhere. And Jesus' aim is to spur us to action, to stop what we are doing that marks us by maybe greed or anxiety or violence, to stop that and start again with new resolve. It's a very Lenten thing, to be in sync with the God of the gospel, to be people who pardon, people of mercy, compassion and generosity, hospitality and justice. And that last bit's from Walter Brueggemann. So that's the little background I can offer.
With the help of Walter Brueggemann, it's not going to be a bad sort of background. But yes, absolutely. So we're not going to prevaricate is a key part of this, but there's lots else that you highlighted as well. So Anne, start off by telling me what you find challenging.
I wonder, it could be because I spent a number of years in a reasonably fundamentalist church as a teenager. But one of my challenges is not to read all these sorts of readings, the little apocalypse, and here where there's, drastic things happening, not to read them as if Jesus is meaning the end times. It's kind of automatically, oh, this must be, he's talking about the end judgment. Whereas he's probably talking about the fall of Jerusalem. So, the fall of Jerusalem will be a time when a lot more towers are going to be falling. It's going to be a time where the Romans are going to be killing a lot more of the Jewish people. And Jesus is essentially saying to them, if you do not change direction, right, this is what's going to happen. The Jewish people did rise up in rebellion, and this was the disaster. So I feel as if Jesus came now and said there's going to be an enormous stock market crash in the next 10 years, we wouldn't think he was meaning end times. We would think he was meaning in our time. And so did they. But I guess even if Jesus was talking about a particular event in 70 AD, not our own futures, as you said, John, the urgency is still there. Don't mess around, change direction now.
Urgency doesn't go away, not necessarily kind of eschatological urgency. I just wanted to use that word because it's a nice one. But let's go on and see, Mark, where you're finding the challenge here.
I think the challenge for me is that it's so easy to say, oh, it's those other people. They're not so good. I'm not going to say the word bad because it's too black and white, if you like. But without having a look at what we're doing, just a quick little story of Christmas Day one time in 1999. And I was in a situation, we had Christmas dinner, and Dad hosted a guy who was an alcoholic. It was all right, but just some of his language kind of shocked me, and I needed to get out and to have a bit of a breather for about 2 minutes. And I thought, I'm supposed to be the one who's welcoming, and I realized that I'm not so perfect, if you like. And I guess that's what the season of Lent is, a time of reflection, or what somebody mentioned about the Greek word metanoia.
All right. So we've got an about face. John, that was the metanoia. John, where for you is the challenge?
Well, for me, I suppose mine is more personally focused. What is the fruit that I'm called to bring forth? Like, what would a new life following Jesus more closely look like for me? Living with less, loving those I find difficult. So there's a challenge there that's always on the boil. And I suppose if I did have to look at it as a story of the end time, I know, Anne, you don't, but if I did, am I ready to give an account of what I have done with this gift of life? And I don't think I'd be ready to say yes.
It's not an easy thought, is it?
No.
Well, that leaves us in a kind of a bit of a hiatus because we're all feeling a little bit short here. So let's dig out some good news. Mark, give us some good news here.
The one about the fig tree, I take it from the parable that the gardener is Jesus. That despite whatever predicament is, that he doesn't give up on us or invests in us, and that the manure is grace, perhaps.
That's fascinating. It's always good to play with those sort of connections that Jesus is making, and that's probably not one I've heard in a sermon, but it's a
No.
lovely little angle. Thank you, Mark. John, I'll come to you next for the good news.
Oh, I did like what Mark said.
Yeah.
I find there is warning in the parable, but like Mark said, there is also grace, because on our side is Jesus. So it's like who says, as the gardener, yes, it's been unproductive for 3 years and it should be cut down, but let's give it another go.
Mm.
We have time to change, but not too much time.
Yes.
Yeah, time to start seeing others as Jesus sees them and respond to them as he did. Yes, there's good news there for sure.
So we're zoning in there on some grace. I always like to hear that. Anne, for you, good news?
I think my good news is something that some people may not find good news, and that is the idea that not everything is engineered by God. We've inherited quite a sense of, God's providence, which can sometimes make us have to battle with the idea that every appalling thing that happened was actually God's will. I think what Jesus is saying is God didn't actually make that tower fall. Presumably the tower fell because it wasn't built well. And God didn't cause the Roman soldiers to murder these people. They did it because they had evil in their hearts, or they were ordered to by somebody else. So we don't have to try to find God behind the cause of these things. We don't have to play complex mind games, even really to work out the why of tragedies. I think some tragedies have no why except the evil in the world. But the good news part of that is our freedom. We genuinely are free, and God has genuinely chosen to work with us as free human beings, so that through whatever tragedies that come, God can work with us to bring out good. And that's that Romans 8 thing. That's an incredible, mind-blowing privilege that God would work with these fallible creatures like us, and that with working through him and with him, good can come in the end. But we don't need to blame God for it in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, let's now apply all this. And while you're on a roll, Anne, so what?
Okay. So Jesus' time on earth drawing to a close, and people are letting the opportunities pass by. You can imagine them thinking, I don't have that much longer to get these ideas in your thick skulls. And all the opportunities are passing. And so for me, the so what is how many hours and days slip by filled with essentially nothingness or distractions. So I'm not recommending busyness, because that can be as filled with nothingness as idleness does. But you said at the beginning, John, about this whole, at the end of life, what will you have done with your life? And so that is the final line in that beautiful Mary Oliver poem. And I'm just going to read you a little bit of that, because she's been sitting watching the wonder of a grasshopper. And she finishes, I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
Wow, that's great.
Thank you, Anne. All right, Mark, so what? So I think we've got a big one there, but another so what?
I guess mine is, first of all, embrace the grace, but never cheapen it or be blasé about it. And the idea of, to quote from Jesus with talking to Pilate, where he says, my kingdom is not of this world. You could say that Jesus is also saying, my investment is not of this world. The investment is about us. The investment is about humanity. The investment is about creation. And alleluia, that Jesus, the gardener, loves us to that extent.
Thank you, Mark, indeed. And John, you look like a person who's had a thought as you come to a so what for us.
I did have a thought. I thought of another poem, but I can't put my finger on it. It's by David Whyte, about being ready to go on. All this preparation that happens is cooking tea. Almost ready for the moment where he goes on. It's like going onto the stage before a bigger audience. That's just a nothing anyway. It's not a nothing. It's a wonderful thought, and I love that poem by Mary Oliver, and I love what Mark said. You can probably delete all what I'm going to say. Then I would say that was going to say that if you're a disciple who stumbles along the Christian way, this would probably give you comfort.
Yeah.
If you're someone who doesn't really do much with your faith, if you're kind of an unproductive believer, then it might light a fire under you, which would be good.
So what with a challenge, or at least a warning. Thank you very much. It is an interesting and uncomforting, if that's a word, passage, but you've helped us, I think, draw a lot out of it. So the three of you, and Mark, John, thanks for breaking it open, and let's see where it takes us as we preach this Sunday. Thank you.